Torontonians, get ready for another tax hike. The city's proposed budget comes with a 6.9% property tax increase. We'll talk to those defending the numbers and those opposing them.
Could the Premier of Ontario be calling a snap election? It's a question that continues to pop up at Queen's Park, and Doug Ford isn't necessarily shutting down the rumors.
Plus, heartbreak on the highway. A serious crash on the QEW leaves a 9-year-old boy dead. More on the factors police are considering.
And taking on a turf war. Toronto police launch another task force after a spike in shooting connected to the tow truck industry.
You're watching Live at 5.
Good evening. I'm Phil Perkins.
And I'm Lena Latifat. Thank you for joining us here on Live at 5. It is an increase that would cost Toronto taxpayers hundreds of extra dollars. The city proposing a 6.9% property tax hike. The numbers are out for Toronto's proposed budget for 2025, and they include more money for a number of services.
Yeah, for more on the spending plan, we'll go live now outside City Hall. The CP24's Melissa Duggan. Melissa.
Hey there, Phil. So yeah, we're talking city budget today, but of course this hits home for so many, affecting household budgets when we're looking at just how much more property owners are going to be forking over in the year ahead. Right now, that proposed property tax hike sitting at 6.9%. And that's not all. You also have to add on to that a hike that we're looking at, proposed anyway right now, for water and for garbage fees of 3.75%. Mayor Olivia Chow says there is money in the budget to hire more first responders, expand food programs, and add more apartment inspectors to make sure rental units are in good condition. The mayor announced last week also, as part of this whole process, that the latest TTC budget would freeze fares for a second year in a row. She also said that the city would hire more traffic wardens to ease congestion, preventing gridlock at those very busy intersections. For more on the spending plan, here is City Manager Paul Johnson.
We understand affordability. We heard that very clearly from Torontonians, but we also understand the need not to affect service delivery. So if you look at the balance in this budget, much of this is to maintain the service levels that we see here in the city of Toronto. There are some targeted new investments in some areas that people talked about being underinvested in. And so I think we've tried to strike that balance. It is on the downward trajectory, and I understand the debate now will be, and the feedback to the mayor as she prepares her final budget for submission on February the 1st will be, what's that right rate to be at?
City staffers are proposing an operating budget of $18.8 billion. That's $1.8 billion more than the 2024 operating budget. And of course, looking back to last year, I'm sure a lot of people remember this time last year when we heard from the city that property owners were set to see a 9.5% property tax increase. So this year, lower than that, but certainly there are critics to this plan. Here is some of the opposition, including coming from Councillor John Burnside.
Torontonians, I don't think, are going to be really happy because I don't think they felt the commensurate increase in services. Like, I don't think anyone's going around saying that, hey, Toronto's got so much better in the last 2 years that I'm willing to pay 17%. You know what, look, I like Mayor Chow. I really do personally like her. I just think that they haven't shown that, well, first of all, their priorities are a little bit skewed. They haven't shown the tough leadership that's needed in tough economic times.
So there is a review, a consultation process that is to come. We are expected to hear Chow's final budget to be presented February 1st. Then it goes to City Council for a meeting on February 11th. But if you think back to this time last year, the proposed property tax hike, it was at 10.5%. It was trimmed down to 9.5%. It's unclear if we could expect that kind of a reduction this year. We expect that there are property owners in Toronto that are certainly hoping for that, keeping a very close eye here at City Hall for all the talk that's coming here in the next few days and weeks ahead. Back to you.
A lot of chatter, no doubt. Okay, thank you. Okay, well, a lot of chatter on this.
Yeah.
Speculation continues that Premier Doug Ford may call an early election. A new poll suggesting the Liberals are closing the gap on the PCs.
CP24's Beatrice Faisman has more on that chatter from Queen's Park tonight. Beatrice, I think what so many people find to be interesting is that the Premier isn't saying no.
He's not saying no, and he's saying no decision's been made, but we're going to wait and see what happens stateside. And so today was actually the first time that we heard concretely from the Premier that he's mulling over calling a snap election. It's been deny, punt until today. So he's saying, let's see what happens when Donald Trump gets inaugurated 1 week from today. If he imposes these 25% tariffs on all Canadian imports, then it sounds like Doug Ford is going to go to the polls. Here's why.
Let's take a look at what happens on January 20th or 21st, and all depends on what sort of tariffs he's putting in there. But I know one thing, his number one target, the bullseye, is on the backs of hardworking Ontario workers, and I will do everything I can in my power to protect the workers of Ontario and also Canadians across the board.
Certainly, I can't remember when was the last time that something happening stateside, which of course is going to have detrimental effect not only on Ontario workers, but on workers right across the country if these 25% tariffs are imposed. But I've never heard a premier actually hinge his decision on if he was going to call a snap election or not on what was happening down there. And part and parcel with that is the PCs, they run on fiscal responsibility. An election costs tens of millions of dollars. And so Doug Ford's got to justify why he's going to spend those millions of dollars and why he's going to send Ontarians back to the polls. He says, well, I'm going to need some approval from Ontarians to spend millions of dollars to stimulate the economy to protect workers if these tariffs are imposed. But today, Bonnie Crombie and Marit Stiles saying, we'll work with you. We'll all work together. We'll vote with you to get a deal done to put Ontario first. Keep in mind, Doug Ford does have a majority government. Here's more from what we heard from Marit Stiles, who was out in Windsor earlier this afternoon.
Workers in Ontario want everybody coming together right now. The last thing we need to be doing is to be divided and fighting among each other at a time when we need to be putting the good of the province ahead of our own political interests. And so I'm asking Doug Ford to do the same thing. Let's work together. Let's put the good of the workers here in Windsor and in every corner of this province ahead of our own political interests. You have the mandate as a majority government, as the premier of this province. We're ready to stand with you to keep fighting for those jobs.
And again, Doug Ford has a majority government. He can pass any piece of legislation that he wants to pass. That's how a majority works. As for Bonnie Crombie, she was out here at Queen's Park this morning saying if Doug Ford calls a snap election, he's ultimately being selfish. But I guess we'll get a better idea on if Ontarians are going to the polls at least 1 week, 2 weeks from now when we see what happens when Donald Trump takes office. Back to you guys.
All watching this so closely. Beatrice, thank you. Will there be a provincial election? We don't know, but there will be a federal election, that's for sure, eventually. And we could find out whether Industry Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne will make a run for the Liberal leadership as soon as tomorrow.
A source close to the minister says he'll reveal his decision during a talk at the Canadian Club in Toronto over the noon hour. The event is being billed as a conversation about AI, economic security, supply chains, and critical minerals against the backdrop of these looming U.S. tariffs. There are currently 7 prospective candidates with forms posted on the Liberal Party website to collect the signatures they require to enter the race.
508-3, you're watching Live at 5.
Coming up, Toronto police are launching a task force to address a rise in shootings related to the tow truck industry. Welcome back to Live at 5. The province's police watchdog investigating after a woman fell to her death from an apartment building in the West End.
Yeah, here's what we know about this tonight. It happened at 100 High Park Avenue, just north of Bloor. The Special Investigations Unit says police went to the building to arrest a wanted person around 2 o'clock this morning when there was an interaction with a 44-year-old woman who fell while apparently attempting to scale down the building. She was rushed to hospital where she was pronounced dead. This happened at the same building where a woman fell to her death in 2020 during an interaction with police. That was Regis Korchinski-Paquette. The officers involved were eventually cleared of any criminal wrongdoing.
And brutal stuff on the highways in Halton region. The investigation continues into a single vehicle rollover on the QEW in Oakville that left a child dead.
Yeah, this
happened.
is so sad. It happened just after midnight in the westbound lanes near Bronte. The OPP say a pickup truck lost control and went into the ditch and rolled. There were 3 people in that truck. The 38-year-old driver suffered serious injuries. A 9-year-old boy who police say was asleep in the back seat was ejected and died in hospital. The other passenger was not injured. OPP also telling us this was a family.
The roads and weather were dry and clear at the time. Obviously, we're looking at human factors, whether or not impairment, fatigue played a factor. That's certainly part of the ongoing investigation. And the fact that someone was ejected from a vehicle and the types of injuries that were sustained, are also looking at occupant restraints and seatbelts to see whether or not they were used effectively or properly at the time.
Police are trying to determine whether, as he said, their seatbelts were being used. Those involved are from the Hamilton area.
And anybody with information about the crash is being asked to contact the OPP.
Well, a driver has been charged after a girl was killed in a collision in Ajax last year.
The 13-year-old died after she was hit while riding her bike in the Rossland and Westney Road area on November 7th. Durham police say the girl was riding through a marked crossing when she was struck. A 44-year-old woman is now charged with careless driving causing death.
Staying on the roads for a very different reason. For the second time in months, Toronto police are announcing a task force in response to violence in the towing industry. This comes after 3 shootings last week.
CP24's crime analyst Steve Ryan joins us live now with more on Project Dodger. So this is the second task force to take this on. Steve, what's different about it?
Yeah, well, last year they had Project Beaten, and that was very successful, where 6 people were arrested and charged, over 180 some odd charges, and it was as a result of a turf war amongst a few tow truck operators in the city's East End. So Project Dodger is aimed at addressing the same thing. It's aimed at addressing the criminality and gun violence that the police say has been going on for some time in Scarborough. So there's going to be an intelligence-led approach to this problem. The police will have plainclothes officers on the ground collecting intel, and there'll be a uniform component as well. People in the area, most often in the vicinity of Markham Road and Lawrence, they can expect to see a heightened police presence as well while the police continue with this initiative. Now, I did speak with Inspectors Krawchuk and Harris today at the 42 Division in Scarborough, and here was some of the conversation I had with both of them. Let's have a listen.
Most men and women out there doing their job every day, and they want to do the best job out there. It's a small group, we believe, that's causing this, that our intelligence shows, and obviously they're making a big impact. Though that's the biggest problem, right? They're creating fear in the community, and especially with the tow truck operators themselves.
It's quite concerning, the level of violence that we're starting to see, and just for this year alone. 10 shooting incidents, and 7 of those can be attributed to the tow truck industry. So it is, it's our goal, obviously, to stop the violence and let the public know and be rest assured that we will be out there. We are concerned just as equally as they are, and it is our goal to put a stop to the violence.
For context, in 2024, 13% of all gun-related occurrences were linked to tow truck companies. And this year, given we're only 2 weeks into this year, but 70% of the gun occurrences are related to tow truck companies as well. Let's send it back to you.
An ongoing problem. Steve, thanks so much for this. Staying with policing, a Toronto police inspector has been temporarily demoted for interfering in a collision investigation involving her nephew. You may remember this story.
Yeah, her name is Joyce Schertzer, and she'll now be at a lower rank of staff sergeant for 9 months after she was found guilty of discreditable conduct and neglect of duty. A disciplinary tribunal heard that in May 2022, Schertzer was informed that her nephew crashed his pickup truck into a pole on Lakeshore Boulevard. She arranged for an officer from her own division to be dispatched to the crash site, and she also attended. Documents show her nephew was cleared to leave about 10 minutes after talking to the officer from 11 Division. The officer leading the investigation didn't even get a chance to determine whether alcohol might have been a factor. Schertzer told the tribunal there was no signs of impairment, and if there had been, she would have arrested her nephew herself.
Well, police are investigating 2 separate home invasions that happened within hours of each other at the same residence in Markham.
Yeah, police have released Photos of 2 out of the 4 suspects believed to be involved in the invasions at a home near Kennedy and Highway 7. Police say last Friday morning, 2 suspects entered the victim's bedroom, sprayed a substance, and then stole items. A similar incident occurred at the home about 5 hours later, but police believe that different people were involved. In the second case, a woman was restrained and assaulted. 2 of the suspects are described as Asian males who spoke Mandarin.
York police are asking for help to identify suspects in a hate-motivated break-and-enter in Markham.
Police say 2 suspects broke into a commercial unit near Yonge and Doncaster early Friday morning. They vandalized the property, causing significant damage, and left anti-Semitic graffiti on the property. If you recognize either of these suspects, police want to hear from you.
517-3, you're watching Live at 5.
Coming up, we'll take a look at a new poll that finds that nearly 60% of Ontarians are concerned about their ability to repay their debts. Welcome back to Live at 5. U.S. President Joe Biden says a Gaza ceasefire and hostage deal is on the brink of coming to fruition.
Biden made the remarks while speaking at the State Department about his stewardship of American foreign policy. U.S. and Arab mediators are reported to have made significant progress toward brokering a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. That war began October 7th of last year when militants stormed into southern Israel and killed about 1,200 people and abducted around 250 people. A third of the 100 hostages are still in Gaza. They're believed to be dead. And the war has killed more than 46,000 Palestinians in Gaza. That's according to health authorities.
And the federal government settled a class action lawsuit with military members who were subjected to racism during their time in the Army.
The settlement is worth up to $150 million, and individual payments will range from $5,000 to $35,000. The claimants are people who served in the armed forces between April of 1985 and this year and experienced racism while in uniform. The settlement also includes a pledge to make systemic changes to the culture of the armed forces.
Well, price of stamps going up.
Yeah, the price of most stamps up by 25 cents to $1.24 now. Canada Post says the price increase is to keep up with rising costs of providing service. Letter mail volumes have decreased by 60% over the past 2 decades. That's not surprising, while the number of addresses to serve has gone up. The new rates are expected to bring in $80 million in additional gross revenue in 2025.
All right, well, a recent poll suggests many Ontarians are in a pretty precarious financial position right now.
Yeah, the latest MNP Consumer Debt Index found nearly 60% of Ontarians are concerned about their ability to repay their debts. Even if interest rates decline, more than half are worried the rising rates could move them toward bankruptcy. And 7 in 10 say they desperately need interest rates to go down. 46% were concerned about someone in their household losing their job.
Well, severe weather in 2024 set a new record for insured damages in Canada.
Weather-related losses surpassed $8 billion last year, shattering the previous record of $6 billion set in 2016 following the Fort McMurray wildfires. The 2024 total is nearly triple the insured damages in 2023 and 12 times the average for the decade between 2001 and 2010. Last summer was the most destructive season in Canadian history, thanks to the wildfires, floods, and hailstorms we experienced as a nation. 4 catastrophic events in July and August accounted for $7 billion of the $8 billion in damages. The single costliest event was the Calgary hailstorm.
It is 5:22. Feels like -11. You're watching Live at 5.
Coming up, the Raptors have lost 5 games in a row, and they are getting ready to take on the Warriors tonight. We're going to tee that up for you next.
It's a 2-point game.
Well, Meghan Markle is postponing the release of her Netflix show because of the wildfires in Los Angeles.
Well, there she is. She's putting everything on hold, including our video. The premiere of With Love, Meghan had initially been set for January 15th. Well, that date has been pushed back all the way to early March. So another 15 days. In a statement shared by Netflix, the Duchess of Sussex thanked the streaming platform for supporting her decision to delay the launch, saying she is focused on helping those impacted by the wildfires in her home state.
And we've seen footage of that, of her helping out with her husband, Prince Harry. Now, Beyonce's foundation is donating $2.5 million U.S. to wildfire relief in California. The Bay Good Foundation will make the donation to the LA Fire Relief Fund to assist people impacted by the wildfires. It also wants to make sure funds go to churches and other community organizations. Bay Good was established in 2013 to help with economic disparities within communities.
Well, we're in the middle of award season in Hollywood. The announcement for this year's Oscar noms have been postponed a second time because of the wildfires. They were originally set for this Friday and then moved to January 19th. Nominations will now be announced on January 23rd.
Turning to sports, Casey Stoney has been named the next head coach of the Canadian women's soccer team.
Yeah, Stoney was most recently the coach of the San Diego Wave, and as a player was the captain of the English national team. The Canadian women's team has been without a leader since Beth Priestman was ousted following the drone spying scandal during last year's Olympics. Canada Soccer says Stoney will start in February at the Pinatar Cup. That is a 3-match series in Spain.
The Raptors will try once again to put the brakes on their latest losing skid when they take on the Golden State Warriors tonight.
Yeah, it's a 2019 Finals rematch. Both teams kind of in a bit of a rebuild. Toronto coming off that 123-114 defeat at the hands of the Pistons on Saturday. They still only have one road win. This is the Raptors' 5th straight L. The team currently sits in second last place in the Eastern Conference with just 8 wins on the season. The Warriors are 19-19. Starts at 7:30 at Scotiabank. Let's get a dub.
Yeah, really hoping they can turn things around.
Yes.
Well, the Vikings take on the Rams tonight in the final NFL wildcard game.
Yeah, it should be a good one.
Yeah.
They've all been kind of meh. But this one could be good.
I like that.
LA is the home team, but this game is being played in Arizona due to the wildfires. Minnesota finished the regular season 14-3. They also got beat down by the Lions in the last game. They're going to rebound. The Rams, they're a bit of a surprise. They're 10-7. The winner will take on the Philadelphia Eagles on Sunday in the NFC divisional round.
And a reminder of a construction impact now on the Don Valley Parkway for the next couple of months. So this is a long-term impact.
Yeah, one northbound lane on the DVP is closed from the Eastern Ave on-ramp to Queen Street East. The lane restriction is part of the city's continued rehab project for 4 bridges in the area, and it is scheduled to remain in effect until the spring.
And a heads up for subway riders that there is an early closure on a stretch of Line 1 to keep in mind this week. Here's what you need to know about that. Service between St. Clair and Finch will end at 11 p.m. every night until Friday. Crews will be performing track work and shuttle buses will be running in the meantime.
528. Feels like -11. You're watching Live at 5.
The City of Toronto's proposed budget for this year includes a property tax hike. We're going to tell you how much coming up next. Plus, we're going to have reactions. Stay with us.
Heartbreak on the highway. A serious crash on the QEW leaves a 9-year-old boy dead. More on the factors police are considering.
And taking on a turf war, Toronto police launch another task force after a spike in shootings connected to the tow truck industry.
And homeowners, get ready for another tax hike. The city's proposed budget comes with a 6.9% property tax increase. We'll talk to those who are defending the numbers and those against them.
And could the Premier of Ontario be calling a snap election? It's a really big question at Queen's Park. And Doug Ford isn't necessarily shutting down the rumors.
This is Live at 5.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lena Ladifat.
And I'm Phil Perkins. You're watching Live at 5. Our top story, the province's police watchdog investigating after a woman fell to her death from an apartment building in the West End.
It happened at 100 High Park Avenue, just north of Bloor. The Special Investigations Unit says police went to the building to arrest a wanted person around 2 o'clock this morning when there was an interaction with a 44-year-old woman who fell while attempting to scale down the building. That's what investigators say. She was rushed to hospital where she was later pronounced dead. This happened at the same building where a woman fell to her death in 2020 during an interaction with police. That was Regis Korchinski-Paquette. The officers involved were eventually cleared of any criminal wrongdoing there.
Let's go to the roads now. The investigation continues into a single vehicle rollover on the QEW in Oakville that left a child dead.
It happened just after midnight in the westbound lanes near Bronte. The OPP say a pickup truck lost control and went into the ditch and rolled. There were 3 people in that truck, a family. The 38-year-old driver suffered serious injuries. A 9-year-old boy, who police say was asleep in the back seat, was ejected and died in hospital. The other passenger was not injured.
The roads and weather were dry and clear at the time. Obviously, we're looking at human factors, whether or not impairment fatigue played a factor. That's certainly part of the ongoing investigation. And the fact that someone was ejected from a vehicle and the types of injuries that were sustained, are also looking at occupant restraints and seatbelts to see whether or not they were used effectively or properly at the time.
Police trying to determine if fatigue was a factor. As Mr. Schmidt said, seatbelts were used or even used properly. We understand that those involved were from the Hamilton area.
And anybody with information about this horrible crash is being asked to contact the OPP.
Let's go to Ajax now. A driver has been charged after a girl was killed in a crash last year.
The 13-year-old died after she was hit while riding her bike in the Rossland and Westney Road area on November 7th. Durham police say the girl was riding through a marked crossing when she was struck. A 44-year-old woman is now charged with careless driving causing death. And for the second time in months, Toronto police have announced a task force in response to violence in the tow truck industry. It comes after 3 shootings last week.
Yeah, CP24 crime analyst Steve Ryan joins us live with more on Project Dodger. This is not a new issue, Steve. We understand there's always seemingly turf wars with tow truck companies. So what makes this one so troubling for police?
Well, it started last year. They had Project Beacon in 2024, and that resulted in 6 arrests and 184 criminal charges. And police believe that this is an ongoing turf war in Scarborough between a couple of tow truck operators. Project Dodger is the latest. This comes in 2025. It's a project aimed at addressing the uptick in criminality and gun violence amongst a couple of tow truck companies. So the police, in initiating this project, have said to me that you can expect to see a heightened uniform presence in and around the areas in Scarborough, particularly the vicinity of Markham Road and Lawrence. And there will be an intelligence-led approach to this as well. They have plainclothes officers on the ground collecting intel and feeding it back to the officers in charge. Now, I spoke with 2 of the inspectors out here in Scarborough earlier today, Inspector Krawchuk and Inspector Harris, and here's what they said to me earlier. Let's have a listen.
There's obviously an ongoing feud. Investigation and intelligence would suggest that as well. But it is, I got to highlight that it is a small portion of the overall tow truck industry. Some bad actors, as if I may, that ply their trade with violence.
I'm concerned both as a police officer and as a person, a member of the public. I mean, it's very concerning. If these bullets are flying and it doesn't seem to be an exact time of day, sometimes it's overnight, sometimes it's in the middle of the day. It's very concerning. For the tow truck operators themselves who have a dangerous job as it is, but for the people sleeping in their homes and everything, it creates a ripple of fear in the community. That one of the reasons we put this project together.
In 2024, police tell me that the 13% of all gun-related occurrences were linked to tow truck operators. This year, we were only 2 weeks into the new year, mind you, but 70% of the gun occurrences that the police are investigating are also linked to tow trucks. Send it back to you guys.
Thanks so much for this. A Toronto police inspector has been temporarily demoted for interfering in a collision involving her nephew.
Joyce Schertzer will now have the lower rank of staff sergeant for 9 months after she was found guilty of discreditable conduct and neglect of duty. A disciplinary tribunal heard that in May of 22, Schertzer was informed that her nephew crashed his pickup truck into a pole on Lakeshore Boulevard. She arranged for an officer from her division to be dispatched to the scene, and she also attended. Documents show that her nephew was cleared to leave about 10 minutes after speaking with the officer from 11 Division. The officer leading this investigation didn't even get a chance to determine whether alcohol was a factor. Schertzer told the tribunal there was no signs of impairment, and if there had been, she would have arrested her nephew herself.
To Markham now, where police are investigating two separate home invasions that happened within hours of each other at the same residence.
Police have released photos of 2 of 4 suspects believed to be involved in the invasion at a home near Kennedy and Highway 7. Police say last Friday morning, 2 suspects entered the victim's bedroom, sprayed a substance and stole items. And then a similar incident occurred at the same house about 5 hours later, but police believe different people were involved. And in that second incident, a woman was restrained and assaulted. 2 of the suspects described as Asian males who spoke Mandarin.
York police are asking for help to identify suspects in a hate-motivated break-and-enter in Markham tonight.
Police say 2 suspects broke into a commercial unit near Yonge and Doncaster early Friday morning. They vandalized the property, causing significant damage, and left anti-Semitic graffiti on the property. If you recognize either of these people, you're asked to contact police.
5:37 -3, you're watching Live at 5.
Well, could voters be heading to the polls for 2 elections coming up? Well, the latest on provincial election speculation. Welcome back to Live at 5. Let's go to Queen's Park. As speculation continues to swirl that Premier Doug Ford may call an early election, a new poll suggests that Liberals are closing the gap on the PCs.
CP24's Beatrice Faisman joins us live with more on what the Premier had to say today. This is a real possibility, Beatrice.
It's the clearest sign yet, Lena and Phil, that the Premier is certainly considering this snap election. I mean, he didn't deny it today and essentially said his decision to send Ontarians to the polls is going to hinge on what happens stateside when a week from today, Donald Trump takes office and he's threatening these 25% tariffs on all Canadian imports. And today, he essentially gave us a clue into the PC's minds. And so here's a bit of what he had to say. The they he's referring to off the top, he's talking about Bonnie Crombie and Marit Stiles.
They may think it's okay just to go ahead and throw off our fiscal plan moving forward. I don't think that. I think if it comes to it, and we have to spend tens of billions of dollars, we go to the people. Let the people decide. It's their money. It's not the government's. That's where we differ.
And so the Premier today is signaling that depending on what happens when Donald Trump is back at the White House, he could essentially say, Ontarians, it is up to you whether we spend a lot of cash to stimulate the economy and essentially help out thousands of Canadian and Ontario workers specifically who would be impacted by these potential tariffs. 2 problems here. One, the PCs, they believe in fiscal responsibility, so the Premier has got to essentially convince voters that he needs a mandate from them in order to get these future deals done. Secondly, he's already got a majority government, and today we're hearing from the leaders of 2 of the main parties, the NDP and the Liberals, both of them saying, Doug Ford, Mr. Premier, we will work with you to pass stimulus bills in order to help Ontarians with this looming threat of these tariffs. And so Marit Stiles says, you don't need a mandate. We're here to support you. Today, Bonnie Crombie essentially accusing the Premier of being selfish if he does call a snap election. So here's a bit from Bonnie Crombie, who, as you mentioned, is making a little bit of headway in the polls.
He has a majority government and he does have a mandate. He didn't come seeking a mandate when he wanted to spend $1 billion to expedite the sale of booze and wine at the corner stores. He didn't come to seek a new mandate when he wanted to spend $2 billion at Ontario Place, or tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars on self-promoting ads both in Ontario and now in the United States with a firm that's closely tied to one of his closest advisors and team strategists.
And so certainly a lot has changed and shifted in the political landscape. We've been watching what's happening in Ottawa, and now certainly all eyes on Queen's Park, especially a week from today, 2 weeks from today, to see what happens. Will the Premier essentially drop the writ and say, Ontarians, it's time for you to go to the polls? It sounds more and more clear, Lena and Phil, that it's something the Premier is very much so considering.
All right, Beatrice Faisman, thank you. Okay, well, she mentioned a recent poll suggests that the Ontario Liberals, led by Bonnie Crombie, are closing the gap on the Progressive Conservative Party's lead. The Liaison Strategy Survey shows that Doug Ford's PCs leading Bonnie Crombie's Liberals by 10 points. The Liberals are up 3 points to 30% support, a level not seen since May 2024. The poll surveyed just over 1,200 Ontario voters. The margin of error is plus or minus 2.82%, 19 times out of 20.
The gap is closing, and we did a poll very early in the new year, just as it began, that sort of showed us the same numbers we were seeing in December, same numbers we were seeing in November and October of last year, which is the Progressive Conservatives have a wide lead over the Ontario Liberals, followed closely behind by the Ontario NDP. Now we're actually seeing a little bit of movement. And of course, there's been a couple of things that have taken place since our last survey, one of which is that the Prime Minister has announced that he's not going to be running in the next election. Liberal Party federally, of course, is choosing a new leader. And so perhaps because of that, perhaps because of early election speculation or the Trump tariffs.
And for more on the election speculation, and there's a lot of that at Queen's Park, we're joined by John Capobianco, political strategist and senior vice president and senior partner at Fleischman Hillard High Road. John, always good to be with you. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Lots to talk about, isn't there?
Lots to talk about, as always.
Okay, so look, if the premier comes out and says these American tariffs mean I need a new mandate, and that means it's time for an election, how do you think Ontarians would respond? Would they buy that?
Well, I think it'd be up to the messaging and up to how the premier wants to message the actual election call. I think it's still very much up in the air whether or not he wants to go early or whether or not he wants to stick with the original mandate, which goes until the summer of 2026. I think he's made it pretty clear over the course of the last little while, ever since President-elect Trump dropped the bomb of the 25% tariff that he wants to impose upon Canada, which, of course, Ontario being one of the largest provinces would be hit pretty hard. So I do think that a lot of the things that we've been seeing from the premier and other premiers, quite frankly, who are spending a lot of time, a lot of effort meeting with a lot of their U.S. counterparts, be it governors, congressmen and women. You know, just Friday, the premier met with the U.S., the Canadian ambassador to the U.S., just to talk about these things. So what I think it's going to come down to is going to come down to whether or not over the course of the next number of weeks, when President-elect becomes a president on the 20th, and how serious he is with the tariffs and how that's going to affect Ontario and whether or not he believes having a mandate or having a strong mandate is going to be important enough to go to an election early.
All right. So do you think, how much weight do you think they put these liaison strategies polls saying that, you know, the Liberals are gaining a little bit of headway here in terms of support before potentially, hypothetically speaking, pulling a snap election?
Well, as you know, polls are a snapshot in time, and I think what you'll see is, you know, some fluctuation of it. And I think the pollster said it earlier, where he mentioned that any one of a number of things that happened over the last little while might have affected the polling numbers, be it the Prime Minister's resignation, be it the talk of an early election. All of these things might have had a factor, not least of which, of course, even the discussion about having tariffs in Ontario and how Ontarians feel about themselves, you know, with respect to whether or not the affordability question is still going to be an issue, whether or not they're going to be able to afford bills or afford groceries if, in fact, the tariffs do come into play. So a lot of those issues do affect how people feel. And based on that, there'll be some margins, but I do think that the premier still is enjoying a fairly significant lead, because I think he is by far leading by way of all the premiers, not least of which, of course, Premier Danielle Smith, who actually met with the president-elect. But Premier Ford has been pretty strong and pretty out there and pretty vocal with respect to how he wants to deal with Ontario and how he's dealing with the U.S. on this trade issue.
John, I want to talk about the political elephant in the room, if I can. That's the Pierre Poilievre factor. A lot of people believe he will be the next prime minister, and the latest polling certainly seems to suggest that will be the case. Do you think Doug Ford is timing a provincial election based on a federal one?
Well, I think the opposition like to speculate that that's the reason why he wants to do it. I think there's always reasons to believe that a change in government federally will always have some level of effect on provincial governments in some ways. I know that Premier Ford has had a fairly good relationship with the current Liberal government over the course of the last number of years, be it the trades and the announcements that they've done, and the fact that they've been able to do a lot of cross-jurisdictional funding for transit or for other issues in housing and so forth. So I do think some level of change of government federally, and I believe too that there's going to be a change of government. Pierre will become the prime minister. May have some people believing that that's the case, but I think more importantly, Premier Ford has been pretty consistent with respect to consumers and always wanted to make sure that consumers come first and Ontarians come first. So if he believes that this issue of the tariffs and having them spend some money and having to spend some level of capital is big enough that it deserves to have the public's input, then I think he'd call an orderly election. But again, I still think it's very much up in the air whether he wants to go or not.
Okay. John Capobianco, political strategist and senior vice president and senior partner at Fleischman Hillard High Road. Good to be with you.
Thanks, John.
Thanks so much.
Take care. Okay, let's talk about some municipal politics. No election there that I know of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you imagine?
Oh, no. I think we'd like it. I think Ontarians would
It would
probably...
be way too much.
They'd burn out. Okay, let's talk about it. They might burn out from this. Toronto taxpayers could be on the hook for hundreds of more extra dollars a year. The city proposing a 6.9% property tax hike. The numbers are out for Toronto's proposed budget for 2025.
Yeah, and that could cause a lot of financial burnout for sure. CP24's Melissa Duggan is standing by with the latest numbers at City Hall. What is this going to mean for people's pocketbooks, Melissa?
Yeah, Lena, that's a good question. So basically, when you break it all down, you're looking at the average household for a property worth $700,000. They're looking at paying about $270 more a year if this proposed budget does go ahead as planned. Still waiting to get that green light on that, though. But as you mentioned, a property tax hike of 6.9%, part of a proposed plan that was unveiled here at City Hall today. As part of that, we are hearing from Mayor Olivia Chow defending her spending plan, saying her priorities are for policing, TTC, libraries, more money for those sorts of programs expected if we do see this 2025 budget and get the rubber stamp here at City Hall. Still a process to go through. There are some consultations, some meetings that still have to be part of this process. But right now, these are the numbers that we're looking at that also include a 3.75% hike when it comes to water and garbage fees. So we're looking at Torontonians certainly paying more in 2025. Here's more of what Mayor Olivia Chow has to say.
Our city is growing quite dramatically, 125,000 people in 1 year alone. When there are more people arriving, more people are going to call for support and help. 911, 211. That's why we have these wonderful people here supporting them, right? When your city grows, the service has to grow. If not, you call and, you wait a long time. That's not safe. And you take TTC. I see TTC workers here. We need to increase the number of services because there are more people taking public transit.
Speaking of public transit, we heard from Chow last week saying that as part of this whole budgeting process, fares on the TTC expected to be frozen. That is for a second year in a row. So city staffers are proposing an operating budget here of $18.8 billion. That's $1.8 billion more than last year's operating budget. Of course, last year is when we saw that record-breaking property tax hike of 9.5%. That was the biggest number that the city have seen since amalgamation. So this number, not quite so high, but certainly not getting thumbs up across the board. Opposition coming in part from councillors like Brad Bradford. Here's what he has to say.
It's significant at a time when the city has never been more expensive to live in. The mayor is introducing a budget that has tripled the rate of inflation. And I think a lot of folks right now are concerned about their grocery bill. They're concerned about putting fuel in the tank. We've got incoming tariffs with the new Trump administration. So things in Canada could get a lot more expensive. The only thing that we can control at City Hall is the biggest bill that you pay every year, which is your property tax bill. And yet this year, the mayor comes forward with one that has tripled the rate of inflation. I think that's going to be concerning for a lot of Torontonians.
People wouldn't want a conservative premier.
So I'm outside of the mayor's office right now. She's got some work to do. She's going to be proposing her version of the budget when to City Hall. February 1st is when we're expected to get that submission from her. Then City Council is going to be meeting on the budget come February 11th. Back to you.
Sorry, the mayor's office. Thank you. 5:52 feels like -9. Motion live at 5.
Coming up, the latest on the wildfire situation in Los Angeles. Stay with us for more. Welcome back. We'll take you to Los Angeles now, where tougher weather conditions are likely to hamper efforts to battle multiple wildfires. Winds, they're expected to pick back up.
Yeah, again today, at least 24 people have been confirmed killed in the fires that have wiped out entire neighborhoods. More than a dozen people are still unaccounted for, a number that could continue to go up. The National Weather Service issuing a red flag warning for severe fire conditions through to Wednesday with sustained winds of 80 kilometers an hour, gusts up to 115 kilometers an hour.
Well, country music star Carrie Underwood is set to perform at Donald Trump's inauguration.
The singer will perform America the Beautiful shortly before Trump takes the oath of office at the U.S. Capitol next week. A statement released by Underwood reads in part, quote, "I am humbled to answer the call at a time when we must all come together in a spirit of unity and looking to the future." Trump will be sworn in as U.S. President January 20th.
That's coming up. It's 5:59 -3. This is Toronto's breaking news, CP24.
Thanks for watching. CTV News at 6 coming up.